We are also being joined by Mark Matthews, the Managing Director at Julius Baer & Co. Bank. He's live with us from Singapore. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, my first question, sir, what do international investors want from India's budget 2024?
Well, it depends what kind of investor. Are they an equity investor or a bond investor? I think bond investors would like some assurance that the fiscal deficit will come back into that target of about 4.5% in a couple of years. And I think the government will probably say something to that effect, that the quality of the capital expenditure is very solid, which it is, by the way, and so that will allow GDP growth to continue and tax collection to continue to grow, and therefore India can achieve 4.5%. And of course, that looks pretty good compared to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, United States, for example, their fiscal deficit as a percent of GDP is over 7% now. Equity investors care about growth, and so I think I don't know if they're going to be that focused on this budget, because, as you know, the big news won't really come out until after the election in the July main budget. But I think they'll be paying attention to any populist measures. And if we recall, when Vajpayee was prime minister 20-odd years ago, there was very strong and decent growth, but it took a while to percolate down into the rural sectors. So his India Shining campaign didn't actually help him that much when it came to the elections. And so I think that there'll probably be some thing for the farmer, something for the farmer. I don't really know what, but something populist as well.
Right, let's talk about India's ambition. The government's report recently on India likely to become a $7 trillion economy by 2030. Is that a realistic ambition in your view?
Well, let's see. That's 6 years from now. I do think that's actually achievable because something happened about 6 or 7 years ago, which was really extremely rare in democracies, which was the big reforms we all know about, the GST and the bankruptcy court and the Property Act and all those things. And they're the kind of deep structural reform that most democracies are very reluctant to impose, because they hurt in the short and medium term, and so chances are you're not going to get reelected. And so the thing is that once you've gotten past that stage, when that kind of reform has been implemented and the economy is adjusted to it, it's such a strong building base from which you really create a new economy. And so that's what's happened. And I think the most important thing I would say is the small and medium-sized enterprises, which are probably about a third of the economy, were dragged kicking and screaming into the real economy, which they never really were in before, through tax collection. And therefore, all these taxes that the government is a recipient of and has been spending on investments and physical infrastructure have really changed the economy so much that it can now become a manufacturing economy, not just for its own very large domestic market, but for the rest of the world. And the implications of that are very profound, and I think will allow the economy to roughly double in the time period you're talking about.
Mr. Matthews, you mentioned small businesses. In fact, as you rightfully mentioned, they are driving growth, the growth engine, so to speak. What can be done to keep that growth momentum going? Women-led businesses, smaller businesses, startups?
Off the top of my head, I don't have any advice. I'm not very good when it comes to that, but I feel the economy is doing so well anyway, growing at around 7%, that you don't really need to do much more. It's just organically found a way to adjust to the new tax regime, and that's in the rearview mirror now. And so I just don't think you need to do a lot more. It's already growing very well just on its own.
I'd also like to pick your brain about capital expenditure, investing in India's infrastructure. Can you give our viewers a sense of why capital expenditure by the private sector is so important, given the fiscal challenges to the government?
Well, I suppose that the obvious answer is that if the private sector is doing the investing, then the government doesn't have to borrow much money and spend a lot of money to build it. And so it's better for the government if the private sector is doing it. That would be the obvious answer. And of course, therefore, the deficit isn't as wide, and the credit rating is a good one, and cost of borrowing is lower. That's sort of the thought process behind getting the private sector involved in infrastructure spending.
Right. This, of course, 2023 was a year of geopolitical conflict, 2 wars, the crisis in the Red Sea. In all of that, as you mentioned, India has been sort of a glimmer of hope, given how the economy is faring. So what can be done to keep that high rate of growth, the momentum going?
Well, I think the simple answer is don't get in the way. Isn't that what Ronald Reagan said? I don't remember precisely, but he said something like, the best thing for government to do is just leave the private sector alone. And I think that's what India is doing. It's a pro-business government, and we're bearing the fruits of that now. So I wouldn't tinker with what, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. If you had a wish list of sorts or one big ask, what would that be? Well, that's one big wish for the Indian market. I suppose I'd like to see more access for foreigners, and that could be through allowing them to own stocks directly onshore or more ADRs offshore. But it's easy to buy an Indian ETF or a emerging market ETF, and that's what most people do. But ultimately, as this becomes a bigger and more important market, it would be nice if foreigners could themselves invest directly in single securities. Right. Any particular element that the international investor market will be watching out for in the budget?
As I said, it depends if they're equity or bond investors, but I don't really think, sorry to pour water on this, but the budget's that important anymore. Sorry to say that. I think that especially with all the reforms that have been done, this is an economy that's just very robust by itself, and so it doesn't need much help. And then on top of that, we all know with the election coming and this being an interim budget, anything really meaningful won't come out until July. So I don't think people are really paying that much attention to it, to be honest.
WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.